Mosaic, and welcome to the annual Mosaic Youth Rally. We're so thankful that you can be here this morning. And this morning I have the privilege of introducing my friend Anthony Bosman. I first met Anthony, actually, right when I got engaged. We were at a Faith and Science Council, and it was kind of funny. Like, he was one of the first people I met, and the very next semester I was at Andrews. So it was kind of fun, and we've been friends ever since, and we were just thankful that he accepted the invite to be here. He's a math professor at Andrews, and I'm sure he will share just a little bit more as he goes through our message, but I hope that you will be blessed. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Eric. Howdy. It's good to be back in Texas. I was in Houston for 5 years when I was doing my graduate studies, earning my PhD in mathematics, and you know, one thing I took away from Houston was howdy. It's such a great, warm greeting. What we're doing this weekend is we're talking about sense making. You know, there's a lot in the world right now that just doesn't make sense. Things are crazy. We talked about it a little bit last night. How can we make sense of everything that's going on? And as we think about sense-making, I wonder, do you have some tools that you use? Do you have some strategies that help you make sense of things when things don't make sense? What is your go-to for making sense of the world? I'll share with you one of mine. Well, what I like to do when I can't understand things is I just look up at the sky, and it's, you know, maybe I go on a run with my dog, I end up at the lake, I'm looking at the sky, and there's a sense of just like looking up at the sky puts everything in perspective, right? Just looking at the night sky, seeing all those stars. You can see hundreds, if you're away from light pollution, thousands of stars, although we know there are somewhere around 100 billion stars in just our one galaxy, which is just one of billions of galaxies. Just looking up at that helps me make sense of things. I'm always reminded of this line of the psalmist that says, "The heavens declare the glory of God." But right now, we live in a cultural context where the majority of Americans, when they look at the sky, they don't necessarily feel that response. The majority of Americans feel that there's some tension between religion and science. So a recent Pew Research poll found that 59% of Americans, when they think about religion, they think about science, they see these two things being in conflict. Rather than religion and science both leading them to be like, whoa, this is awesome, they see these two things as making competing claims. They feel like they have to answer, should I be trusting God or should I be trusting science? And these are two different things, and that can have some deadly results. And so what I want to do today is I want to share with you, as I've studied and I've tried to learn more about the mathematical sciences, some things that have stood out to me that say, hey, wait a second, maybe it isn't such a conflict after all. Maybe deep down, religious faith and scientific discovery have a deep concordance. Maybe faith in God is the best way to make sense of recent scientific discoveries. And so what I'm going to do today is look at 5 features of our universe, and for each one, we're just going to ask the question, does God help me make sense of this? How can we understand this aspect of our universe? Sound good? Okay, here we go. So for our first feature of the universe I want to look at, it's the fact that the universe had a beginning. Now, maybe this is something that you're familiar with, but for most of human history, going back to the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, it was believed the universe just always has been there. It's like, why is there a universe? Well, it's always been there. There's nothing to explain. But as we moved into the 20th century, and we started discovering that there are other galaxies, and we started measuring these galaxies, we saw these other galaxies were moving away from us. And then we said, well, if everything's moving away, the universe must be expanding. And if we play that story backwards, it must have been some beginning. And so originally there was some resistance to this. If there was a beginning of the universe, where did it come from? But the evidence became overwhelming that the universe had some beginning. So how are we to make sense of this? For over 2,000 years, it was just assumed the universe has always been. And then suddenly we discover in the 20th century, no, the universe had a beginning. I want to offer 2 explanations. One is the biblical explanation. We found at the very beginning of Genesis. We shouldn't be surprised the universe has a beginning, because Genesis 1:1 begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In fact, one of the reasons there was so much reluctance in the 20th century to accept the scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe was because people said, if the universe had a beginning, oh, that seems like that's pointing too much to God. That's not scientific. We shouldn't accept this. But the evidence just became overwhelming that, in fact, the universe had a beginning. So since then, others have tried to offer new explanations, new ideas for why the universe, where the universe could have come from. If you don't want to accept Genesis, well then, where could the universe have come from? So here's one. The late physicist Stephen Hawking, he gave this explanation in his book, The Grand Design. He says, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Not from God, not God creating, but just from nothing. It's not that God created the universe, it's the law of gravity. So I want us to take a second and analyze the statement. Now, Hawking was a brilliant physicist. He made huge contributions to the field. But I don't know if this was his brightest statement. Can anyone see any possible weaknesses with this statement? What doesn't quite add up? Yeah, the universe creating itself, that seems like a really curious thing. How does something create itself, right? That doesn't quite seem logical. Anything else in that statement that seems a little off? Yeah, so if there's nothing, then how is there a law, right? So there must be something. But there's one other problem I have with this statement. The law of gravity, well, it's merely a mathematical description. The law of gravity is us describing how the world works. But a mathematical description, an equation, doesn't have the power to create. If you doubt this, take out your wallet or your purse and just look how much money you have in there. So in my wallet, I got $10. $10. I could write down a description of what I have in my wallet. If on my blackboard, I could write down $10. Or maybe you would write down 10 plus whatever change you have. I found something else. This is pretty good. This is a good day, guys. I found a 20. I could write down 10 plus 20, and I would have 30. But what if I came up to the blackboard and I wrote times 10? I changed the mathematical description. Would that create new money in my wallet? No, simply having an equation doesn't bring anything into existence. Mathematics describes reality, but mathematics is not able to create the world. You know, sometimes we talk about the law of physics, and we think the law of physics are doing something, like the laws of physics are controlling the universe. But we should remember the laws of physics are merely descriptions of the world. The laws of physics have no power to govern the universe. They have no power to create a universe. They're merely describing what has been created, what is being governed. And so I want to suggest that the fact that the universe has a beginning, this can't be explained by some equation. Rather, you need some agent, something with creative power to explain this. And that's what Genesis is offering us, an account for why the universe had a beginning. Now, when people hear this argument, they said, okay, the universe had a beginning, so there must have been some cause. You could put the argument something like this. Everything that begins must have some cause. The universe had a beginning, so it must have some cause. A cause that has creative power. There must be a God. Sometimes I hear the response, but who created God? Right? Maybe this is a question. If God created the universe, then who created God? How might we respond to that? If God created the universe, then who created God? Well, let's look at this argument more carefully. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The reason we know there must be some cause for the universe is because we now have overwhelming evidence that the universe began to exist. How about the case of God? Does God begin to exist? Well, if we look at the Psalms, the God we believe in is a God who does not have a beginning. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world. Before there was any universe, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. See, we don't need an explanation for where God came from, because God has always been. God has always been present from everlasting to everlasting. The reason we need an explanation for where our universe came from is because we know our universe had a beginning. I want to suggest the beginning of the universe is one strong evidence why you might believe, hey, maybe there's something going on behind the scenes. Maybe there's a creator involved here. But that's not the only evidence we have. Over the last half century, we've been amassing a massive amount of evidence showing that the universe is fine-tuned. Now, this is really exciting stuff. It's so exciting that as scientists have been studying this, some of them have been shaken in their faith, or perhaps I should say shaken in their atheism. One of them is the astronomer Fred Hoyle. As he was learning more and more about fine-tuning, how the universe is fine-tuned, notice what he said. Nothing has shaken my atheism as much as this discovery. It's as he's learning the science, he's discovering, whoa, this is pointing to something bigger. So what is fine-tuning all about? As we go about and we develop these equations trying to describe the universe, we come down to some fundamental constants. Things like the speed of light, or various forces, or various ratios between forces. And there are a couple dozen of these. But what we discovered is, as we look at these exact values of these constants, if they were off by only a slight amount, a universe such as ours that permits life couldn't exist. Let me give you one example. Let's just look at two of the forces, the electromagnetic force and the strong nuclear force. If we look at the electromagnetic force, you can see as you vary the value, well, if it gets too big, you can't get carbon or any heavy elements. You can't get these elements that are essential for forming complex structures such as are required for life. Or if you make your nuclear force too strong, you make chemical reactions that are just impossible. You can't even get, if it's too small electromagnetic force and too large of a nuclear force, then hydrogen cannot form. The most basic elements cannot form. In order to get a universe where we can have complex carbon-based life, you need the electromagnetic force to be just right, just within this range, and you need the strong nuclear force to be just within this range. So it's just a tiny spot of all the possibilities that actually permit life. And now this is just a couple of them. There are dozens of these forces. Fred Hoyle goes on to explain. He says, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests a superintellect. Remember, he doesn't believe in God, so he's trying to find language to describe what's going on here. He says, a superintellect must have monkeyed with the physics, as well as with the chemistry and biology. He says, there are no blind forces worth talking about. The numbers one calculates are so overwhelming to put this conclusion beyond question. To help us understand just how incredibly unlikely this is, Fred Hoyle offered a metaphor, an analogy. And I want to share that analogy with you this morning. But to do so, I'm going to need two volunteers. Would two people be willing to come up here for just a quick demonstration of how incredible fine-tuning is? Two people? Hey, how about you two? You want to come up? It'll be fun. Come on up. The analogy Fred Hoyle gives involves a Rubik's Cube. Have you guys seen one of these before? Yeah, you know what a Rubik's Cube is like? Have you ever tried to solve one? Yeah, they're a little bit tricky, aren't they? Yeah, you want to come? Yeah, that's good. Yeah, here comes Dad. Are you pretty good at Rubik's Cube? So Fred Hoyle gives this analogy. He says, getting all the constants just right is like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. But if there was no intelligence behind it, it's like the universe is trying to solve these blindfolded. Are you guys okay to put on these blindfolds? Yeah? So I'm going to have you put on the blindfold, and then I'm going to hand you a Rubik's Cube. And I'm just going to have you here. I'm putting your hands right here. I'm putting your hands. And I'm going to have you just blindly twist it. And we're going to watch and see if they can solve it. So this is Fred Hoyle. It's each fundamental force, you have to get it just right. You have to get in just the right configuration. All those constants have to be just right. And so he says, it's just like you're blindly trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. Now, there are quintillions of possibilities when it comes to how many configurations the Rubik's Cube could be in. But maybe if we were here long enough, one of them could get it, right? Maybe. But Fred Hoyle's point is, it's not enough to have just one of the fundamental forces to be correct. You need all of them to be correct. And so what you actually need is you need them both to solve it. And you need them to be correct at the same time. So it would be like both of you solve the Rubik's Cube at the exact same time. Take off your blindfolds. Let's see, did you get it? No. So this is his point. Not just actually two people, but dozens of people. If we were all trying to, thank you very much. Let's give them a hand. Thanks, guys. If we wanted to get a universe that could prevent life, we would have to get all these values to be correct and aligned exactly together. And he says, this is impossible. There must have been some super intellect behind it, not blind forces. The mathematical physicist Freeman Dyson, commenting on fine-tuning, he says, the more I examine the universe and the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe, in some sense, must have known we were coming. Now, of course, the universe isn't sentient. The universe couldn't have known we were coming. But he's trying to get at this idea that it's like things are set up in such a way to permit life. That if things had just been ever so slightly different, life wouldn't have been possible. It's like the game was rigged from the beginning. What I find fascinating is while I study the mathematical sciences, I see people talking about this, and then I go and I read the book of Genesis. And in the first chapter of Genesis, I see a story of God fine-tuning the world. You see, in Genesis chapter 1, it begins with the world is without form and void. But then what God does in creation week is God fine-tunes the world. In the language of Genesis, on the first day, he separates the light from the darkness. On the second day, he separates the waters above from waters below. On the third day, he separates the land from the sea. And then there's a beautiful parallelism. On the fourth day, having separated light from darkness, he has now assigned roles to the sun and moon to be the lights of the morning and of the day and of the night. On the fifth day, having separated the water below and above, he now fills them with birds and sea life. And on the sixth day, having separated the land from the sea, he now fills it with animals and humanity. And so the story of Genesis is telling in this beautiful language how God was fine-tuning the world for the arrival of humanity on the sixth day. But Genesis goes one step further. It tells us something that science can't. It also mentions what happens on the seventh day. You see, if you notice this pattern, it's the universe was without form, it didn't have structure, and it was void. It was empty. And so what God did is he gave it form, he gave it structure, separating light from darkness, separating water above from water below, separating land from sea. He's giving it structure, he's forming it, and then he fills the void. He fills those spaces. So creation week is God creating spaces and filling it. What happens on the seventh day? God creates a space, not a physical space, but a space in time. And what does he fill it with? He fills it with his presence, because God wants to be close with humanity. There's this beautiful way in which Genesis 1 just agrees with our most recent discoveries of the deep structure of the universe, but it goes beyond to say, yes, the universe is wonderfully structured, but also there is a God who has created space and time to be here with us. So we look at two pieces of evidence so far. The first is the fact the universe had a beginning. And the best way to explain that is that there was some creative agent who was able to bring into being, not an equation, not a formula, but a creator. The second is that the universe is fine-tuned for life. I want us to look at one third feature of the universe, and that's the fact that we can make sense of it, that the universe is intelligible. Einstein put this beautifully where he said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible, that we're able to make sense of it, that we can go out and do calculus and do physics and describe the world we live in. Now, perhaps we don't appreciate this. Maybe we just kind of take it for granted. Yeah, there are people out there who write equations on blackboards, and they can describe the universe. But it's actually a pretty amazing thing. I recently adopted a dog. Anyone here have a dog? Yeah, I'm a huge dog lover. Man, I miss that guy. So I adopted this dog, and he's a great dog. He's a pretty smart dog, but also he's pretty stupid. You see, I'm a mathematician. I do lots of mathematics. Sometimes I'm there with my dog, and I just like, if I can teach him to play fetch, maybe I can teach him some vector calculus, So I've tried this, but it doesn't work. It's not that I'm not a bad teacher. It's not that he's a bad dog. It's just my dog's brain isn't developed to learn vector calculus. Like my dog's brain just isn't capable of learning mathematics, of being able to describe the world. But our brains are. And why is that? Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverers of DNA, he put it this way. He says, our highly developed brains, if you're just accepting an evolutionary account, well, then they wouldn't be evolved for discovering scientific truth. They would only enable us to be clever enough to survive. Under an evolutionary explanation, we should be smart enough so we're really good at surviving, we're really good at getting food and reproducing. But the fact is, our brains can do so much more than that. We're able of describing the deep structure of the universe. And it's quite a mystery. If we simply are the result of survival of the fittest, why would we have brains that are able to probe some of the deepest mysteries of the universe? It seems like the evolutionary account falls short. In contrast, Genesis gives a compelling picture for why our brains can do the incredible things they can. Genesis 1:27, God, the one who had created heaven and earth, created humanity in his own image. In the image of God, he created us, both male and female. And so the picture of Genesis is, yeah, we have brains that can make sense and understand the world because we were made in the likeness of him who is creator of the world. And it's this fact about the human brain that I think unlocks us to understand the history of scientific progress. Melvin Calvin, the Nobel Prize-winning chemist, he notes that it is this belief that the universe is governed by a single God, a God whose image we're in, and not the product of the whims of many gods, not many gods competing, but a single God. He says, this monotheistic view is the historical foundation for modern science. The modern science came out of the conviction that there was a single God who behind the universe who had created it to follow law and order. Isaac Newton is one example of someone who had this conviction. You might know Isaac Newton for his work of sitting under an apple tree and the apple falling on his head, right? That famous story. But what that story is trying to illustrate was Isaac Newton's big insight that the laws that govern heaven and earth are the same. That just as the apple falls down the tree, the moon orbits the earth. It's the same law behind them both, the law of gravity. But where did Isaac Newton's conviction that one law can describe both heaven and earth come from? It came out of Isaac Newton's religious conviction that there was one creator of both heaven and earth. And since there was one creator of both the heavens and the earth, you don't need two sets of laws to describe heaven and earth. You can have a single set of scientific description. So Isaac Newton believed that there was law in nature because he believed in a lawgiver. Isaac Newton believed that he was able to understand those laws because he believed he was made in the image of that God. And as you look at the history of science, these pioneers of modern science, again and again, you see them tell stories of how them doing science is them glorifying God. One of them is Johannes Kepler. He says, I had the intention of becoming a theologian. He thought the only way I could glorify God was becoming a theologian. And yet he pursued science, and he says, now I see how God is, by my endeavors, also glorified in astronomy, for the heavens declare the glory of God. Sometimes we talk pejoratively about scientists as if scientists are against faith or something like this, and the church can use sometimes pejorative language, but as we look at the history of science, we actually see that the founders of modern science were acting out of a Christian commitment. They were seeking to understand the world because they thought as they understand God's creation, they were glorifying God. They were coming to better understand God as creator. Here's one more, Maria Agnesiou. She's a fantastic pioneer in calculus. She wrote an influential textbook, made some significant contributions to the field. But notice how she puts it. We always act to achieve goals. The goal of the Christian is the glory of God. I hope my studies have brought glory to God as they were useful to others. She's talking about her studies in calculus and the work she had done in the 1800s. And so as you look back at these pioneers of modern science, they're all telling the story that they're acting out of their faith. That's what's leading them to expect that the universe is explicable, that we can make sense of it. Peter Harrison takes it one step further. The historian of science, Peter Harrison, he's a historian of science at Oxford University. He notes that if you look at the time of the scientific revolution that took place in the 16, 17, 1800s happened right after the Protestant Reformation. And what he sees is actually the one was unlocking the other. That as Protestants started taking the Bible seriously, he says, as they started taking the Bible and its literal interpretation seriously, it had a vital role in the development of Western science. In particular, for much of the medieval church, when people read Genesis, they were willing to simply read it allegorically. Simply read it as, oh, it's some spiritual story, but it's not actually talking about the world around us. But the Protestant Reformation led people to start reading Genesis and reading Bible and saying, no, wait a second, this is actually saying something about the world around us, which led people to value creation in a new way. And it's, if God is actually invested in creating the material world, let's go out and study it. And so the Protestant Reformation was influential in having us take the Bible seriously, which led to us taking science seriously, leading to the scientific revolution. Okay, so far I've talked about 4 features of the universe of science that I think are best explained by God. The first is the origin of the universe, the fact the universe has a beginning. The second is the fine-tuning of the universe, fine-tuned for life. The third was, do you remember? The intelligibility of the universe, that we can make sense of it. And the fourth is the history of scientific progress. That modern science didn't come out of a clash with religion, but it came out of a deep Christian commitment to understand the God who created the world. There's one fifth and final aspect of the universe I want us to talk about now. And it's one that's not going to appeal just to our rational minds, but it's going to go deeper. And that's the incredible beauty of the universe. You know, some of this other stuff, you're like, oh yeah, science, that's all heady. But beauty, this is something we can all appreciate, right? Just watching a sunset, going out on a hike, looking at the stars at night. We all have an experience of the beautiful in the world. If you look at some of these images by Hubble, as we look out into the cosmos, it's just awe-taking. As you look at those, it's just, whoa, wow, like that is awe-worthy. Or here's another one. As we look at these various nebula throughout the universe, you're like, that is beautiful, that is incredible. It evokes a sense of awe. Awe at what, though? I sometimes talk to my secular friends, and they tell me how when they watch sunsets, they feel a deep gratitude. And I find that such an interesting language, gratitude. Gratitude towards whom? Right? Just experiencing beauty is speaking to your heart in a way that's evoking these feelings of awe and gratitude. You're just crying out to express this towards someone. I think it's so sad that when we create these conflict narratives between faith and science, some people feel like, man, because I take science seriously, I have no one left to express gratitude to. But I'm trying to tell a story that says, no, actually, taking science seriously is taking God as creator seriously, and you still have someone you can express that gratitude to. Paul Dirac, he talks about the influence of beauty in the development of science. So the great physicist Dirac puts it this way. He says, a theory with mathematical beauty. That might be a strange statement, mathematical beauty. You're like, I don't remember math being beautiful. I thought math was, gross and ugly. But for physicists and mathematicians, we think that mathematics is beautiful. And we say when our theories have mathematical beauty, they're more likely to be correct than an ugly one that fits some experimental data. He goes on to conclude, God is a mathematician of a very high order, and he used very advanced mathematics in constructing the universe. But here's Dirac's point. He's pointing out not just is it complex math, it's beautiful math. And so when we want to get our handle on truth, when we want to say what really describes the universe, our pursuit of truth becomes a pursuit of beauty. That these two pursuits are one in the same. That if you want to know what is true, pursue that which is beautiful. And in my own work as a mathematician, I've seen this so many times, it's if things are beginning to get ugly, I'm probably not on the right track. But if I'm pursuing ideas and it's just falling together harmoniously, there's a beautiful symmetry, it's just fitting together, it's beauty and truth fit together. And I find that so incredible because for us as Christians, we have such a beautiful story, and I wonder if something about that story might be suggestive, that maybe there's some truth in it simply because it is so beautiful. C.S. Lewis, he puts it this way. He says, we cannot mingle with the splendors we see, the sunsets, the incredible night skies, these incredible views. We cannot mingle with those splendors. But all the leaves of the New Testament are wrestling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in. We shall get into that beauty. See, right now we look at things as beautiful, and you might come to appreciate the thing itself, but actually that beautiful sunset, that beautiful scene of the night sky, these are just vehicles transmitting, saying, hey, there's something beyond this. There's something that you're longing for. It's waking and longing for you to be joined with something. And Lewis depicts here how the New Testament is anticipating a time when we shall be joined with that beauty in the person of Christ, in God. The New Testament puts it this way. It says, right now we see dimly, little dim glimpses of beauty, dim glimpses of God reflected through his creation. But then we shall see face to face.